Before I get into this video, I just want to make this quick disclaimer. I am not making this video to bash Americans or American tourists because, for starters, I'm an American. And on top of that, at one point, and in many ways, still to this day, I was and am that American. The American that embodies all of the stereotypes that I'm about to discover in this video. That said, if you're an American, make sure you watch this video through to the end so that when you do visit Europe, you don't piss off everyone around you. And if you're European, then make sure you watch this video to the end to see if you agree, and also add in whatever other things that Americans do that annoy you down below in the comments. That said, the first thing that Americans do that piss Europeans off is a lot of them expect everything they like to be as they're used to it at home. No AC? Outrageous. No American style food? Fools. Different service culture? Impolite cavemen. But to be clear, they also have good sides. So this is pretty interesting because when you talk about no AC, I'm not going to lie. Experiencing summer in the Netherlands without AC was a very big challenge for me personally, because I'm the kind of person who keeps the AC on 24/7. I would much rather put a hoodie on than to turn the AC off, because I like for my living space to be cold. And experiencing the lack of AC, not just in the homes, but in some of the other buildings, was very, very jarring for me, especially coming from Texas. So I can see where that frustration comes from, but at the same time, when you understand that air conditioning is not necessarily the best for the environment, and also in much of Europe, especially Northern and Western Europe, and maybe even Eastern Europe, it doesn't really get hot enough for long enough to warrant air conditioning for most people, you understand that it's not really worth spending however much money it costs. We're probably looking at $5,000 to $10,000 to install an extensive air conditioning system in your house if you're only going to use it for maybe a few weeks out of the year. In the Netherlands, in the summer, it actually got cold enough for me to need a jacket some days, which blew my mind. But I imagine that in most other European countries, especially again in Northern and Western Europe, that is also the case. Now, I think in the apartment that my girlfriend lived in Valencia, Spain, they didn't have air conditioning. That's something that I don't really understand. I don't understand how it's even legal to build a building in a place like Spain without air conditioning. I'm filming this video here in Thailand, and I cannot imagine not having access to the AC unit that we have. Life would be categorically more miserable. But other than that, when it comes to American style food and different service culture, I don't really see why Americans would complain about those sorts of things, because for starters, you have McDonald's in literally every country in the world. At least every country I've been to, they have McDonald's in spades. They have McDonald's. A lot of these countries have Starbucks or something similar. A lot of them will have Burger King. If you want American style food, just go to those places. I don't see why that's such a big difficulty. And then when it comes to service culture, as an introvert, I actually prefer European service culture, where they just mind their business, they allow you to mind your business, and they only interact with you when absolutely necessary. As an introvert, I'm always looking for spaces where I can have fewer interactions, not more interactions. So personally, I don't really see why that's such a big deal, because that gives you the power as the consumer to initiate interactions at your own discretion. But I think a lot of Americans, they have this sense of entitlement where they want to feel like royalty. They want people to put them on a pedestal and treat them accordingly. The next thing that American tourists do that drive Europeans absolutely insane is they are loud. And I actually saw this in a few different comments. They are loud. They are loud. That's 3 different comments that started off talking about the volume that Americans speak at. And this one right here says they are loud even when you're speaking to them privately. They're always so surprised by everything and assume they are the first to figure this out. It tastes so different than at home. Wow, you drive stick? Incredible. Did you know you have buildings over 500 years old in your town? Yes, I live here, I know. But in general, they are very friendly and nice people. So, as far as the volume situation, I definitely agree with this. Americans are very loud. And I think a big part of the reason why this is the case, and this is something that I never noticed growing up, but after visiting the US for 3 months, after living in Europe for 14 months, I realized that in a lot of public spaces, they have really loud music. For whatever reason, they have really loud music, and on top of that, when you're in the city, or if you're just walking on the sidewalk, which a lot of Americans never really do, but if you do choose to do that, a lot of times you have road noise. You have very loud road noise, and you have to talk over that. So, in many places in the US, you almost have to speak very loudly in order to get your message across, in order for your voice to be heard. And when you look at the more rural areas where people are more spread out, of course, you have to speak more loudly to accommodate that greater distance, because distances in America just generally tend to be much greater. The problem is that a lot of Americans are unable to adapt. So when they find themselves in a more confined space, like you'll find in Europe, and as I've seen thus far, in Asia, they don't really adjust. And that becomes very problematic, especially when you have a lot of them speaking at the same time. You can spot Americans very easily just based on the volume of their voices. And as an American myself, it really, really annoys me when you can hear people on the airplane behind you talking about whatever they're talking about, and you're trying to watch your movie, read your book, or sleep, and you can't do that because Cindy or Jake behind you wants to talk about their family back home in California, and quite frankly, you don't really care. You don't care to listen to it, but they're speaking loud enough for the whole entire plane to hear them. You hate to see it. But as far as Americans being very surprised by everything and assuming they're the first to figure things out, I think what that really comes down to is, as Americans, a lot of times we're not very well traveled and we don't have much exposure to other cultures because we're brought up believing that America is the only place worth visiting. It's kind of an exaggeration, but a lot of people actually operate in accordance with what I just said, which is scary to think about. But very few Americans are well traveled, and because America is so isolated, it's difficult to catch a flight to a place like the Netherlands where you're going to have to pay probably $700 minimum one way to get from the US to the Netherlands. And with the cost of living in a lot of the US, that's simply not a feasible option. So because they're not well traveled, they don't really have many reference points. I remember that first time stepping off the plane and going outside the airport in Valencia, Spain, and realizing that literally everything was different. Everything from the cars to the roads to the buildings, everything was different. I literally felt like I was being reborn. I felt like I was born again, or like I woke up on some kind of alien planet or something like that. Couldn't wrap my head around so much of it. And when I moved to the Netherlands, I had the same exact feeling. And I've come to love that feeling. But understand that when you're from Europe, you've very likely been to other places. So exposing yourself to different cultures isn't really that big of a deal to you. But to Americans, that is a very, very big deal. And that is why Americans tend to exaggerate things so much. Now, this comment right here says, they are loud, they're angry, we don't take euros or dollars as payment. They like to tell me about my country randomly and incorrectly and loudly. Most of them are fine, but in peak tourist season, I see multiple terrible tourists a day. So this person right here must be from either the UK or Norway or just somewhere that's not in the European Union. But I will say, just to add on to this, I was this person at one point. I was the person who was very, very agitated that some places didn't take my American card. That was something that I was utterly unprepared for. And look, put yourself in that person's shoes for a second, where you're very hungry and you just spent an hour or so picking out your groceries. You get to the counter and your card doesn't work. That's a very frustrating experience to have. So I understand it. But at the same time, I guess what I've come to realize is that you can't just assume that every place is going to accept your method of payment or accept your way of operating in general, when the place has its own society that operates completely independently of American culture. And I think a big misconception that a lot of Americans have, and I myself clearly must have had this misconception for me to be agitated about my card not working in these places, is the idea that every other culture is almost like a subculture of American culture, or almost like a spin-off where America is the center and everything else branches out from it. That is not how the world works. Just because a lot of other countries consume American media doesn't mean that they operate as extensions of American society. So if you're American watching this, you need to keep this in mind. Make sure you are more well prepared than I was. Get yourself an international travel card or something to that effect, or even better, just get some cash at the airport at an ATM, and you won't have to worry about running into that issue. But as far as telling people about their country randomly and incorrectly, I think, honestly, that just comes from the enthusiasm of being in another place. And Americans, they want to sort of flex their knowledge of that place, and they want to seem like they're informed and cultured, even though they're not. And honestly, I probably was like that as well at some point. But what I've come to realize is it's much better to approach those people and those situations with the mentality of asking questions rather than providing answers, because you're not going to give them answers about their own country. Now, the next thing that American tourists do that piss Europeans off is snapping their fingers at the waiters. Wait, hold on. Don't snap your fingers at the waiters. Don't speak or laugh loudly. Don't impose your language to people. Don't be patronizing. Be you and your children very polite. I'm not gonna lie, I agree with this person right here. Bears and chairs, don't snap your fingers to the waiters. This is considered extremely rude here. Any American doing that would just be a huge asshole in general. I agree with that. That is not acceptable behavior in America or really anywhere in the world as far as I'm aware. That's the sort of thing you do to your children in public when they're acting a fool, when they're making a mess, and just generally misbehaving. Hey, stop that. You do that sort of thing. You don't do that to full-grown adults who are literally just trying to make a living. That's one of those things that everyone in your vicinity is instantaneously going to judge your character, and rightfully so. That's absolutely crazy. Now, as far as speaking and laughing loudly, we already kind of addressed that. Don't impose your language to people. So that's an interesting one. I think, again, this comes from this American idea that every other place operates as an extension of America. So, of course, they have to understand English. Why wouldn't they understand English? Because everyone knows about America, so everyone must know English. They must understand it. Going to Spain broke that perception for me permanently, because I realized that, wow, these people don't know a lick of English. And maybe it's different in Barcelona or Madrid and other parts of Valencia. But the part that I was in, I was literally communicating with pointing, thumbs up, smiles, body language, etc. They did not understand any English at all, and I didn't understand any Spanish at all. And it was very interesting because in Spain in particular, the signs were completely in Spanish, which makes sense. But here in Thailand, for example, you have the sign in Thai, whatever the Thai language is, and then you have it in English underneath, even though most of the locals here don't really speak or understand English either. I find that to be really, really fascinating that people have that expectation. But I think that's one of the most fun parts of traveling, honestly, is communicating with people who don't speak your language and you don't speak theirs, and you have to sort of tap into that universal human language, if you will, which of course a lot of that is body language, but it's really just the vibe you give off. So you have to change your approach from an overall vibe standpoint. I hope I'm not getting too esoteric on you here, but if you know, you know. If you've experienced that, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's one of my favorite things about traveling. But yeah, the snapping the fingers thing, that's not gonna fly anywhere you go. Please do not go anywhere and do that. And if I have to tell you not to do that, then I'm not gonna lie, you might just be a bad person. Anyways, moving on, the next thing that Americans do that piss Europeans off is telling people that you're Scottish because your great 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 grandparent was from Scotland. Also, nobody here cares about clans. Apart from that, just be cool. So I don't know what the whole clan thing is about. Haven't really heard of that before, other than the Ku Klux Klan, but I'm assuming that's not what this person is referring to, hopefully. But as far as the whole ancestry thing, that's something that always fascinates me as well. I remember when I was in, must have been 11th grade, so I was around 16, 17 years old. I was in my business info management class. This is early in the morning. It's probably 8:30, 8:45 a.m. And I'm talking to one of my classmates. I'm not going to say his name, but this man looked me directly in my eyes and told me that he was 1% black. Now, mind you, this kid was blonde. He was blonde haired, blue or gray eyes. I don't remember the color of his eyes, but not brown eyes. And he was as white as could be. Now, look, I'm not trying to make this about race, but I would be lying if if I said that I didn't laugh at him for the rest of the class. Literally the rest of the class period, from 8:30 whenever the class began all the way till 10 o'clock when the class ended. I was just laughing at him. And he went and told the teacher, and I didn't get in trouble because she knew it was ridiculous as well. I don't know why Americans are so preoccupied with being 1% of this or 13.2% Scottish, Indian, or whatever else. I don't really know why this is. I guess maybe it's because as Americans, especially African Americans, this is a big thing in the African American community. Different discussion for a different day. But we don't really have a good understanding of our identities because America is a melting pot. So American culture isn't really fixed, whereas Dutch culture or Norwegian culture or Swiss culture, German culture, etc. are very fixed. So you know what it means to abide by Dutch culture. You don't really know what it means to abide by American culture. I guess that could be a part of it. But even to that point, being 13.2% Scottish doesn't really mean anything in terms of your behavioral patterns because ultimately you grew up in America. So I don't understand the preoccupation with that as well. And I can see how being from Scotland and having someone tell you, oh, I'm 2% Scottish, it literally feels like a waste of air having that sort of interaction.